There was a night, a while back now, that you've probably filed under nothing. A delayed train. A cafe that should have closed an hour before it did. Two strangers who wandered in soaked from the platform, ordinary looking, tired, a little out of place in a way you couldn't quite name at the time and didn't think hard enough about to try. You gave them the good table, the one near the heater, refilled their coffee without being asked twice, talked to them the way you talk to anyone at the end of a long shift, unguarded, a little too honest, because it was late and you were tired and it genuinely did not occur to you that the conversation mattered to anyone but you. It mattered to one of them more than you will ever fully know. Let me tell you who was actually sitting at that table. There's a habit, quietly maintained inside that family for longer than most people would guess, of occasionally stepping outside the version of life that gets photographed. Not often, not announced, obviously, since the entire point disappears the moment it's announced. A dressed-down coat, one trusted aide, no itinerary anyone outside a very small circle ever sees. The idea, as much as anyone's ever explained it to those close enough to be trusted with the logistics, is simple enough. Everyone needs, every so often, to remember what an ordinary hour feels like, unscheduled and unrecognized, where nobody in the room is adjusting their behavior around who's just walked in. That particular night, a signal failure 2 stops up the line had turned what should have been a short, unremarkable leg of one of those outings into a 2-hour stall in a town neither of them had ever planned to see the inside of. The aide, a woman named Rosalind, has worked in that world long enough to have a contingency for almost everything except this specific kind of nothing. An evening with no schedule left to protect and nowhere particular to be. They found your cafe because it was the only thing on the street still lit. You didn't know who you were serving. That was rather the entire point, and it worked exactly as intended, which is precisely why what happened next mattered as much as it did. The cafe itself was nothing special, and you'd be the first to say so. A handful of booths with vinyl seats patched more than once. A radio behind the counter tuned to a station that played the same 40 songs on rotation. A window fogged from the rain that had been coming down sideways since sometime around dinner, hard enough that the two of them had come in soaked through despite the short walk from the platform. The principal's collar turned up in a way that, on any other night in any other coat, might have drawn a second glance. It didn't. You'd clocked them the way you clock everyone who walks in that late, quickly, without much interest. 2 more tired travelers waiting out a delay in a town that doesn't get many. You gave them the booth near the heater because it was the only one that still worked properly, not out of any particular instinct about who they were. Brought coffee before either of them asked. Came back 20 minutes later with a blanket you kept behind the counter for exactly this kind of night. Tossed it onto the seat beside the principal without much ceremony, and said something about the heater in that corner never quite reaching the far side of the room. Rosalind ordered a second coffee, mostly to keep you at the table a little longer, which is a habit of hers on these outings, though she'd never put it in those words to anyone. You obliged without seeming to notice you were being kept there. Talked about the storm, about how the last train out had already been canceled twice that month for one reason or another, about the particular exhaustion of a shift that had started 12 hours earlier and showed no real sign of ending on schedule. You'd said, somewhere in the middle of that unguarded hour, something about how you'd been having what you called one of those years. Not dramatic about it, matter of fact, the way people who've actually been through something tend to be, as opposed to people performing it for effect. You mentioned, without quite meaning to turn it into a speech, that you'd learned somewhere along the way that showing up decent on your worst nights was the only part of any of it you actually had control over, and that you'd decided at some point you couldn't fully pin down that you'd rather be the kind of tired that comes from trying than the kind that comes from giving up. Rosalind asked, mostly to keep the conversation going, what had made this particular year one of those years. You'd shrugged, the specific shrug of someone who's decided the details aren't worth spending a stranger's evening on, and said only that it didn't really matter what the specific thing was, that everyone's got their own version of a year like that, and the details change, but the choice at the center of it doesn't. Show up anyway, or don't. You'd chosen the first one enough times in a row that it had started to feel less like a choice and more like just who you were now. You said it while refilling a coffee cup, wiping the same clean spot on the counter you'd already wiped twice. You'd forgotten it by the following week, the ordinary way people forget things they say without rehearsing them. Rosalind hadn't. And neither, as it turned out, had the person sitting across from her that night, though neither of them said so out loud until they were back in the car an hour later, heater running, waiting for a delayed connecting service that would eventually get them home well past midnight. Write that one down properly, the principal had said, quietly, staring out at a platform that had nothing left to look at. The bit about the two kinds of tired. Rosalind did. That's the debrief that matters to this story. A page filed the way she files all of them, under a date and a location and almost nothing else, because the entire arrangement depends on nobody outside a very small circle ever being able to trace it back to a real name. She wrote down what you'd said, as close to your exact words as she could manage from memory, and closed the file, and moved on to the next week's business, the way you do with a memory that feels important at the time, and uncertain whether it'll ever matter again. Months passed. That's usually where these things end, quietly, in a drawer, the way most ordinary kindness does. This one didn't end there. A regional visit came onto the calendar, the kind that happens a few times a year, a day built around a handful of community organizations doing work worth a few minutes of public attention. Rosalind's part in preparing for it is unglamorous in exactly the way most of this work is. Engagement cards. 1 page per person the principal will actually meet and speak with during the visit, compiled from nominations submitted by local charities and employers, a name, a photograph, 2 or 3 lines of context, so a brief conversation can happen with at least some idea of who's standing in front of you. She was going through that week's stack with a colleague, a sharper, younger aide named Imogen who'd joined the household the previous spring and still found the whole process faintly surreal, the way people who are new to institutions like that one often do. She'd remarked, an hour into that particular afternoon, that she'd expected the job to feel grander than it did, that most of it was just very good paperwork done under slightly better lighting than most offices bothered with. Rosalind had laughed, the tired laugh of someone who'd made peace with that exact realization years earlier and told her that was more or less the whole secret of the place, that the grandeur everyone imagines is about 4 days a year, and the other 360 are spent exactly like this, cross-checking names against a spreadsheet. Most cards move fast. A volunteer coordinator here, a small business owner who'd weathered something difficult there, the ordinary, worthy, unremarkable business of a visit day. Imogen had developed a habit, in her few months on the team, of reading each nomination line out loud before passing the card along, partly to keep herself focused through an afternoon that could otherwise blur into a single long paragraph of good deeds. "Cafe worker," she read, sliding your card across the desk. Nominated by their employer for reliability during the flooding last spring. Apparently didn't miss a single shift the whole month, even the nights the buses weren't running. Rosalind's hand stopped on the card before her mind had caught up to why. Your photograph wasn't posed or particularly flattering, the kind of image a local paper takes for a piece about a community fixture. Nothing special about it on its own. It was the two lines beneath it that did it. A cafe. A name of a town Rosalind hadn't thought about in months. A brief mention, from whoever had submitted the nomination, of exactly the kind of quiet, unglamorous reliability that gets someone nominated for something like this in the first place. The sort of person who shows up for their shift regardless of what kind of year they're having. She didn't say anything to Imogen right away. Went instead to the small locked cabinet where she keeps the private debriefs, found the page from that stalled evening months earlier, and set it beside your card on the desk. Same town, same cafe, two kinds of tired. She checked it twice before she let herself believe it, the way you do with something that feels too neat to be accurate. Cross-referenced the date on the nomination against the date on her own handwritten page. Checked the cafe's listed address against the one she remembered giving the driver that night. Read your two-line nomination summary against her own longer private account of the same conversation, looking for anything that didn't line up, any detail that would let her file this away as coincidence and get back to the rest of the afternoon's stack. Nothing didn't line up. Every small detail agreed with every other one, the way facts do when they're actually describing the same real evening rather than two separate ones that merely rhymed. Rosalind has kept debriefs like this for 11 years now, longer than most people on the household staff have held any single role at all. Nobody requires it of her. It started, if she's honest about it, as a way of making sure at least one honest hour a month didn't simply evaporate the way most of a very scheduled life tends to, logged nowhere, remembered by no one, gone by the following week. She'd never once, in 11 years, had a page from that private cabinet intersect with an official nomination card. She sat with that fact for a moment longer than the paperwork strictly required, before gathering both pages and heading down the corridor. She took both pages down the corridor to the office of the private secretary, a man who has read more of Rosalind's private debriefs over the years than almost anyone else in that building, and has learned in that time exactly which ones are worth interrupting his afternoon for. He read your card first, the ordinary version, the one built for a 2-minute conversation during a busy visit day. Then he read Rosalind's older page, the private one, the coffee cup and the platform, and the two kinds of tired. He looked up. Not at Rosalind, at the date on both pages, which lined up exactly the way she already knew they would. "Is this the one we were briefed on?" he asked, meaning the debrief. meaning the evening he remembered Rosalind mentioning months ago in passing as one of the better unscheduled hours the principal had gotten in some time. He hadn't known a name then. There hadn't been one to know. He was simply asking whether the stranger from that cafe and the volunteer on this week's engagement list were, against every reasonable odd, the same person. They were. "Does the principal know?" Rosalind asked. Not yet. He was already reaching for the phone on his desk. But I imagine that's about to become the most interesting 5 minutes of an otherwise very ordinary Tuesday. It was. Rosalind wasn't in the room for that particular conversation, but she heard about it afterward, in the way things get relayed inside a household small enough that very little stays entirely private for long. The principal had gone quiet for a moment on hearing it, the specific quiet of someone doing the same arithmetic Rosalind had done at her desk an hour earlier, matching a face to a memory that had never fully faded the way most passing encounters do. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with a life built almost entirely around scheduled encounters, where nearly everyone you meet has been told in advance exactly who you are and has had time to decide, consciously or not, how they intend to behave in front of you. It makes the rare unscripted hour disproportionately valuable. The way a single glass of cold water matters more after a long day in the heat than an entire pitcher would on an ordinary afternoon. That night at the cafe had stayed with the principal for exactly that reason. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because for about 40 minutes, a tired stranger had simply been honest, with no idea it would ever be repeated to anyone, let alone remembered for months afterward by the very person it was meant for. "I want that conversation," the principal reportedly said, properly. Not the 2 minutes on the card, whatever can be arranged. That's not how these visits normally work. The schedule for a day like that is built weeks in advance, timed to the minute, reviewed by more people than you'd believe necessary for a handful of handshakes and a ribbon cutting. Rearranging even 5 extra minutes usually requires a small negotiation with at least 3 other departments, the kind of scheduling conversation that normally takes the better part of a week and involves at least one meeting nobody particularly enjoys attending. Rosalind made the calls anyway, that same afternoon, working through a list of names she'd built up a fair amount of goodwill with over the years precisely because she rarely asked for exceptions like this one. The head of the visit's logistics team pushed back, gently, the way he pushes back on everyone, citing the timing of the ribbon cutting and the local mayor's own allotted slot and the print schedule for the day's official itinerary, which had already gone to the venue that morning. Rosalind didn't argue the schedule. She simply read him the 2 lines from your engagement card, and then, after a pause, the single line from her own private debrief about 2 kinds of tired. He was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line, and then he said, in the tone of a man revising a spreadsheet he'd been fairly proud of an hour earlier, that he supposed the ribbon could wait 90 seconds. Nobody who's worked there long enough to understand why a debrief page mattered enough to interrupt a private secretary's afternoon was going to argue about 5 minutes for very long. Here's what's true, wherever you are right now, almost certainly with no memory of 2 particular customers on a particularly long, forgettable shift months ago. You had no way of knowing who you were talking to that night. That was never something you could have controlled, and it was never the point of anything you said or did at that table. You weren't performing wisdom for an audience that mattered. You were just tired and honest and decent to two strangers who happened to wander in out of the rain, the same way you'd likely have been decent to anyone else who sat at that table on any other night. It turns out that's exactly the kind of thing that travels. Not because you tried to make it travel, because it was true, said plainly, by someone who'd actually lived it, to two people who spend an enormous amount of their working lives listening to things that are carefully rehearsed and rarely feel like that. You gave them something unrehearsed. It kept traveling for months after you'd forgotten you'd said it at all. Through a debrief page in a locked cabinet, through a delayed connecting train, through a Tuesday afternoon interruption that rearranged a schedule most people would tell you cannot be rearranged. Think about how easily that night could have gone differently. A quieter shift, and you might never have had the 2 extra minutes at that table to say anything at all. A less honest mood, and you might have given them the polite, careful version of an answer instead of the real one. None of it was planned, on your side or theirs. It was just an ordinary Tuesday that happened to align, by no design of yours, with someone who needed to hear exactly that sentence, from exactly someone who meant it, on exactly that night. Somewhere, right now, a 5-minute conversation is being built into a visit day specifically because of a coffee cup and 2 kinds of tired. You'll likely be told only that your community nomination was well received, that they're looking forward to meeting you, the ordinary, pleasant version of events that gets relayed to nominees every time. You won't be told about the locked cabinet, or the platform, or the exact words the private secretary used when 2 pages landed on his desk at the same time, or the 90 seconds a logistics manager quietly agreed to give up from a ribbon cutting he'd been proud of that morning. That's fine. It was never about you finding out. It was about a stranger's honesty on an ordinary Tuesday night, refusing to stay small just because nobody involved knew at the time that it was going anywhere at all. When the day finally comes, you'll shake a hand you don't recognize in a receiving line built for 2-minute conversations, and something in that handshake will last a beat longer than the others, and you still won't know why. You'll assume it's just how these things go. You'll go home afterward and tell someone it was surreal, the way everyone does after a day like that, and you'll never quite know that the surreal part wasn't the visit itself. It was the fact that you'd already met them once before, soaked from the rain, at a booth near a heater that never quite reached the far side of the room. You gave 2 tired travelers the good table and an honest hour. One of them has been quietly waiting for the chance to say thank you properly ever since.